I always, and first, I really do appreciate Chairman Harris and Allison, wherever Allison's at, putting this thing together and organizing it. And thank you, you guys, so much. I always speak as though I never want to be invited back. So, first of all, a couple of things, because I will take the few minutes I have, but to not come at you from a political angle, but from a historic angle, okay? Because I am a student of world history, a student of U.S. history for sure. I've not only read our Constitution, but I've I don't have a horrible golf handicap because I've done things like read all of the Federalist Papers as an example. That's what I do, and I get up in the morning and I read executive orders, or I study our adversaries around the world, and certainly our adversaries right here at home, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But the original, and here on your 10th anniversary, right? The original Freedom Caucus, and I kind of went back and did a little research on what you represent. So Scott, and thank you very much for just being a great friend for many years now, actually. The original Freedom Caucus, and they were represented by the kinds of things that you guys and gals are involved in now, and everything that you just heard all these various chiefs of staff talk about, how you fight for different issues, you're fighting for amendments, all these different things. The original Freedom Caucus was called the Loyal Nine. The Loyal Nines. Anybody heard that number, that name? Yeah, the Loyal Nine, they were out of Boston, actually. And they were prior to the American Revolution. And just to give you a few names, Sam Adams was a part of the Loyal Nine. Benjamin Eads, he actually created the Boston Gazette. Benjamin Church, very famous doctor during the Revolution and certainly prior. John Hancock was a member of the Loyal Nine. Paul Revere was a member of the Loyal Nine. And they used to meet, and actually there was a very tragic event at a bar that it became, because that's essentially what it was then. And it became the Loyal Nine Club. And it was a 2023, it was a really bad event that happened there, and so it's closed now. But so this Loyal Nine, they would meet in secret. What you said early this morning about, you had to be in a closet or somewhere, you're arguing, you're doing things. But this Loyal Nine actually met up in the Boston area. And those just some of the names that I mentioned, those are a few that were part of it. That there was actually a group of 9. And then over time, as they met in secret, they would meet in people's homes, they would meet in basements, they would meet anywhere they could. They typically started to meet in that club, in that bar at the time. This is all prior to this is before the United States existed, right? These were people that were fighting for an ideal and a vision that they had, and they didn't have the ability to pick up a phone and call somebody down in South Carolina, right? If I pick up the phone and if they had to get a message to somebody, it was done by courier, by horse, or there was no wire, there was nothing like that, right? There was none of that. So they knew, because they were for the most part where they came from, and some of their lives evolved to where they ended up, like in places like New England, or certainly in the middle states and Middle Eastern states, and then the southern eastern states. So they all kind of knew each other. They heard about different, who they were. It's kind of the way you guys and gals are now, except you're all over this beautiful, you're all from this beautiful country. I think that your numbers are like 30 or 40 today. I think maybe 40 on a good day. It should be like 400, right? I mean, it's the Freedom Caucus. I mean, whoever was up, many of us just got earlier today, or one of the speakers talking about, what's the matter with that word, and what's the matter with the ideas that we have, right? The kinds of things that we're trying to espouse. So actually, the Loyal Nine was the precursor to the Sons of Liberty. So the Sons of Liberty, which they then, the same members, some of the same members, they created the Sons of Liberty. And then that took on a life of its own. I think it's on, some flags today, right? And maybe the old FBI designated it as a terrorist term or something, right? Seriously. Jim Jordan this morning, this gets back to the Federalist Papers, like Federalist 2 or 3. John Jay, right? So Jim Jordan this morning talked about our freedom of speech. He rattled off 5 rights that we have. You know, and the gentleman in the back that talked about faith during the Chiefs of Staff session up here, you were honoring them for their faith, and don't forget to pray, right? Because I always say that prayer is the most powerful weapon known to man, right? Because believe me, as a soldier, you pray, you know, whether you believe or not. And I've been with people that I know weren't really all that faithful. But man, before you get on a truck or before you get in a helicopter and go into harm's way, everybody shuts up and one person says a quick prayer. You know, you ready break and you get on that whatever mission that you're about to get on, because you don't know if you're all going to come back alive. So prayer remains, you know, you can have, like Paul, you can have all of your freedoms taken from you, but you always have the ability to pray, right? So I don't want to forget that. So Jim Jordan talked about our rights this morning, and it struck me because I've talked about this before to many different audiences. You know, the First Amendment, and that's all he talked about this morning was the First Amendment, and he mentioned 5 parts, and the 5 parts are in order: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition from government interference. Those are all in our very First Amendment. And you know, when you look at the historic ideas about the arguments that they had to be able to come up with these things, right? Bill of Rights, right? To come up with the Bill of Rights. The very first thing that they argued about within the very First Amendment was religion. So it was like a given when they argued about the second thing, which was the ability to speak freely, right? To be able to say what it is that you want to say it as an American. And I have a difficult time when I see people tearing apart the American flag or wearing it upside down, all the different things. But our need to really protect our rights, and I think that's what you guys and gals are really meant to do. You're supposed to fight for them. I got the political side. You gotta think about back home, and you're gonna election, all this sort of stuff. But I have a difficult time with that. But I don't have a difficult time understanding why our rights were created. Okay, and the very first part of the First Amendment is religion. And I know, because you can see their arguments, you can actually see, if you study them intently, you can read the letters from the founders to their wives, or their diaries. In some cases, they kept a lot of diaries. They had a lot of writers back then, right? You can read some of those things, and you can see their argument in there. Actually, the Supreme Court, our current Supreme Court, and past Supreme Court justices have used those documents to be able to make decisions, which is amazing. I mean, they'll go back and they'll actually say, well, what did he think? What was he thinking at the time when he made this call about whatever the call was, right, in a court years past? And they would look at those kinds of things. But the freedom of religion was the very first argument that they had when they created our beautiful Bill of Rights, which is it's a fundamental part of this country. When we talk about the establishment of the United States of America based on a set of Judeo-Christian principles and values, we should be fearless about them, because our founders were. Our founders were definitely fearless. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to was kind of where we are, and I won't spend a lot of time here to do that, because I know you got a lot of other things going on, and you guys and gals are very busy. But I describe this period that we are in. So again, I'm coming at it from a historic example. In 1938, in the world, the British Empire was actually beginning to collapse, and they really saw their heyday probably at the height of prior to World War I, which was actually called the Great War. It wasn't called World War I until we had World War II. Okay, so it was called the Great War. And the British Empire, when they went into World War I, the Great War, that's when they really lost it. I mean, the Kitchener's brigades, and if anybody ever really studied that war, they lost quite a bit. They really, really took a beating. And it took a beating from prestige, right? From the idea of just global prestige at the time. We are in that kind of a time frame right now here in the United States of America. So in 1938, what was happening around the world, and before I go through a couple of quick points here about these tectonic things that were going on, because I do study the rise and fall of nation states. I'm like deep into this, right? Because I'm a guy, I'm an intelligence professional, really by training and education. I've done a lot of studying. I've fought on battlefields, etc. I've studied our adversaries. I've studied ourselves. And when I look at our country, so in 1938, there was actually a great paper written. And what the guy did was he studied the top 7 empires that existed in time, right? Ottoman Empire, Fenian Empire, Roman Empire, British Empire. So he took out and studied them all, right? And the one thing that jumped out at me, because there are indicators that will tell us where we are in terms of our empire, right? The American Empire, which is right now, right? And we really came into the fore back last century, and now we've been at war the entire, so we're in our 3rd decade of the 21st century. We've been at war the entire time, right? 9/11. So really, we've been at war the entire time. Our country is at war right now. Never mind what we're dealing with internally. So the one data point that came out of that study done in 1938 was that the average lifespan for those 7 empires, the Ottoman Empire being the longest empire in the history of the world, roughly between 12 and 1400 years, the average lifespan was 250 years. 250 years. So here we are. We're at 249, right? 249 and a half. Average lifespan of that study, 250 years, of the biggest empires that existed in the history of the world. 250 years average. So here we are. So how do we get another 250 years out of it? Out of this thing? I'm asking children. I'm looking at this. In fact, why I'm here and why I stood and did the things that I did, that just made the decisions that I did, even getting into politics, which is not something I ever wanted to do, was because I looked at my children and my grandchildren principally. At that time, I only had a couple. Now I got, a bunch. And I'm like, I cannot, not the way I was raised, not the way that I'm designed, to be there and not like keep fighting for this country. Because I was someone who was born on an army base. And I just always felt like I was going to go into the military, from the time I can remember. And so my whole family, a brother and a sister that are here now, my whole family is a family of service, going back to World War I. My family comes over from Ireland. Both my grandfathers fought in World War I. But one of those grandfathers fought both in World War I and World War II, along with my father, who fought in the Korean War. Another brother who fought during the Vietnam era. My brother Charlie and I, was graduated from the University around. He was picked by Trump to go command all Army forces in the Pacific. And 3 days after the election, so he was there already when Biden came into office. 3 days after the election, the Biden administration yanked him from that command. And because of my name and because of everything that I was going through, they make a man who served in this. He served more combat time than I have. They yanked him into the J6, fake surrection stuff, like, 5 or 6 times for depositions. A guy who's commanding 185,000 men and women in uniform out in Asia Pacific in the Indo. If you don't believe in good versus evil, start. Because the shifts were at the time of 1938, anti-imperialism was on the rise, the anti-imperialist movement. And so that today is globalism. Okay, it's globalism. The second thing is trade shifts. Huge trade shifts were occurring. The United States was involved. So I don't even get into that because you guys everybody's following all this trade stuff that we're doing, tariffs and all this stuff. So I won't go into the details there. The second or the third point was at that time was Germany had already cut a deal, right? Hitler had already cut a deal with Czechoslovakia, and he's going to take over some of these countries. It's 1938. The U.S., we were still kind of bantering there. But it was Japanese expansion. So the Japanese began to expand. They had already taken over the Korean Peninsula. They're into Manchuria. they're starting to move down into as far down as Singapore and as far west as modern day Bangladesh, which used to be eastern Pakistan. There's so much history there. I had an uncle that fought on the Burma Road. Recently died. He became a priest and went back to Bangladesh and spent 40 years in Bangladesh, and he stood up what's called the University of Notre Dame at Bangladesh as a priest. Graduated from Notre Dame, and all because he fought on the Burma Road during that particular time. Well, that was at then. You're right, this is 1938. Who is expanding today? Who wants to be the dominant world power today? Not by 2050, not by the end of the century, today. That's China. Okay? So China is by far, and if you're not paying attention to what's going on here with this latest summit that they've got, right? Don't get me going on that, but China is like Japan was back in 1938. They are feeling their ropes. Trump was right to put out a post here, maybe last night, maybe yesterday, about, hey, China, you wouldn't be China if it wasn't for, us, right? So have some gratitude, right? They're not going to have any. A gentleman that I took over a nonprofit from, my sister Mary is our executive director of something called America's Future. I'm the chairman of America's Future, a beautiful nonprofit. We work with Tom Homan, we work with Bobby Kennedy, and we work to save children, right, from the scourge of sex and slave trafficking. That's our sort of principal thing. And the guy that I took over from actually parachuted into China at the time. At the tail end of the war, and Singlaw was his name for anybody that wants to go look it up. And he met with Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek. He met with them because that was his mission, to go figure out who these guys are because we're going to help them. Who is a member of the OSS, and he had been serving in Europe. He's gifted a linguist, learns Chinese Mandarin. He goes in there and he works with these guys, and he sends a note back and he says, we can't work with this Mao Zedong. He's too much of a communist. Chiang Kai-shek's our guy. We should work with Chiang Kai-shek. And the answer back from Washington at the time was, no, we're going to work with Mao. So Chiang Kai-shek goes off to modern day Taiwan. Then it was Formosa, and here we are, right? Because of bad political decisions at that time, and they were really bad. And then the fourth big tectonic shift that's going on is the idea of international dynamics, like international relationships and the things that we are facing on the global stage today. Hopefully you've heard of the acronym BRICS, right? BRICS. BRICS wouldn't exist if Obama didn't allow the Chinese to come into the World Bank. And they can now take, at that time when he allowed them to come into the World Bank, they were able to get loans, huge loans. So BRICS is formed, and BRICS is a multicultural institution. It's much more than finances. It has large trade agreements, large military agreements, and they're competing against the United States of America because you have the first thing I talked about, which is globalism. You've got that going on in Europe right now. Europe is a mess. It's a mess, right? It's a total mess. And the war in Ukraine, I'll come back and talk to any of you about the war in Ukraine. It's a loser. It is a loser. And we've got to figure out, and I'm like, I want to support whatever the president says or causes this country to go and do, but it is a losing cause. And the Maidan revolution that took place in 2014 to overthrow the Ukrainian government, done by the Obama administration with the CIA and elements in the State Department, that's essentially what happened in the 2016 and 2017 timeframe. So when they couldn't get Hillary Clinton into office on December 8th, we now know this because of the courageous Tulsi Gabbard, what she exposed, and when I look at it, what they essentially did was they took the Maidan Revolution tactics and they said, we're going to run that again right here in the United States. Okay, we're going to basically try to overthrow the United States, and we're going to use, our media. We're going to use all of the levers of power that they had control of. And then they did it. Then they made the decision to go after a duly elected president of the United States. And frankly, even I at the time couldn't totally understand that. I didn't want to believe. I didn't, because I can be naive about things. I didn't want to believe that. And I'm like, God, this can't be that bad. Right? And, here we are, whatever many years later, I don't know how many years, it's not a math major, but 8, 9 years later, feels like a century. So the world is not this unipolar world where it's all about the United States. It's not. It just isn't. So we got to figure out this landscape globally going forward into this century. It is a multicultural, multipolar world. And there's huge shifts that have taken place. I call it, it's a shift from east-west to a north-south. Okay, and I'm not talking about the Civil War. I'm talking about the rise of demographics, the rise of populations, the demand for so many resources around the planet. Never mind right here at home. And what you all have to worry about is your district, and what you do, or your state, and what you do for your state. And I want you to do that. But I want you to understand that when you do that, you have to do it from the perspective of what is best for this country. That's what I love about the Freedom Caucus. Because you guys and gals stand on the Constitution. And I look at things like that. I look at, who's got the best constitutional voting record in Congress, right? So I'm going to Nashville, Tennessee on Saturday. And I'm talking to, if I can remember the name of their organization, it's the Tennessee Firearms Association. So I'm going to go there and talk to them about the Second Amendment. Tennessee Firearms Association. If there's a bill that's being looked at there in the state, that's insane. Tennessee, right? I mean, a home of guns and whiskey, right? Yeah. I mean, you gotta help us. So hopefully they use one before they use the others. I don't know. You decide. But everything I want you to know. We are in the, and I'll come to a conclusion here. We are in the third arc of U.S. history. And this is an existential period of time. Okay, the first was the American Revolution. The second was the Civil War. Then we had a long period of time where we weren't facing anything existential. Nothing. Not World War I, not World War II, not the Vietnam War. Those were not going to destroy the fabric of our country. Going back to the founders, they warned us about the growth of government, the internals of government power. Be careful. It's always like that. All the way, Reagan, everybody, you guys, you've been talking about it here this morning, right? How, an overbearing, frankly, moving to socialism, moving to more towards communism, which is is the direction we're heading. So this third arc that we're in is existential. The first one had George Washington. The second one had Abraham Lincoln. Thank God. The third one, like him or not, I used to introduce Donald Trump years ago during many, many rallies that I went around in the 2016 campaign. I used to introduce him as the most imperfect president that you're ever going to vote for. And 40,000 people will go, yeah, because that's what we want. We don't want this, perfect coiffed individual. Well, we need fighters right now. We need people who understand what I'm talking about because this is an existential period. And I don't know who said it. Somebody, maybe it was the young lady that was up here. She talked about the people that are coming out of the Freedom Caucus going back to their states and running for higher offices, right? That's really important because what I believe is that where we will win this country is at the state level. I'm not these people that want to redo the Constitution, all these people that want to, no, don't touch it. Beautiful document, right? Let's just use it. Let's fight for it. And so now what we have to do, for now, because we still have these hawks, right? That are, now I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about nations, China and Russia, okay? That are out there right now, and they're like looking at us like prey, okay? P-R-E-Y. And we have to understand that there are competing ideologies on this planet that do not want our way of life to continue to dominate. Freedom is just it's a human desire, right? It's a human desire. So where are we going to be? I don't know. But what I do know is standing up here today and talking to this group, that it gives me, and listening in the last couple of hours to different people talking, and I've met some of you at different times. I so appreciate your willingness to continue to serve, to continue to fight. And the things that I do today, like I tell people, don't worry about what I'm doing. Don't worry about what I'm doing. Because what I'm doing, I stay in touch with the president. I stay in touch with many members of the administration. You know, I've described myself on some podcast as like, you know, for anybody that played any soccer, like a striker on a soccer field. Striker on a soccer field. Because if you're in a job in the administration, which I definitely appreciate that, but if you're in a job in the administration, you're kind of stuck. Kind of in that job, right? If you're not, and you totally understand what it is that we're up against, you're like a striker on a soccer field. A striker on a soccer field can go anywhere on a soccer field. And I can use my voice, and I do. I can use my voice quite a bit around this country. I've probably been, wherever you're from, I've been there in the last 4 years. Guarantee it. I guarantee it. Close to 200 cities and towns that I have been to in the last 4 years. To tell people and to remind people that to have what we have as a nation, it only lasts if people are willing to sacrifice. And it's like, people come up to me all the time and they say, thank you for your service. My father served, my uncle served, my grandfather served. Thank you for your service. And I'm like humbled by it. It's a humbling thing to get that kind of response from people, and I'm thankful. But what I try to do then is, figuring out who I'm talking to, I try to turn the conversation around to, how are you serving? How are you serving today? Because there's people that are out there in your communities, in your districts, in your states, that are looking for hope. And they see you as their voice, particularly this group, right? This Freedom Caucus, right? Because they see you as somebody who's fighting. And so I don't know where we're going to end up, but I know that history takes time. It doesn't take one president. It takes time, right? We right now, though, have a president, and I do firmly believe this, and I am a student of this. We are in this third arc of history here in the United States of America. This is an existential time. And we are either going to come out of this period, and it may be beyond 2028, probably will be. I mean, Xi just moved up their timeline. Okay? He just moved up their 100-year timeline to 2030. Okay? So we're in this period of time where something is going to happen. Things are going to happen. And we've got a guy in the White House that doesn't give a shit. Use my Irish. He's like, and all you got to do is open up True Social and see what he's thinking, right? Now, do I support every single thing? No. Will I call him up and say, what are you doing? Yep. Because what we need right now is we need people who understand the sacrifices that are required to maintain this beautiful country that we have. Remember, when I talked about the beginning, the Loyal Nine, there was not even a country. Yet they were deciding then, John Adams, Hancock, Paul Revere, and others, they were deciding then, we got it, and actually, the original Loyal Nine got together to fight against the Stamp Act. That's the original intent of why they were getting together. Because they decided on an issue that was existential to them. So, please try to understand it. I'm deeply honored to the whole group of you that you do what you do on a daily basis. I want to again say thanks to Allison for being patient and back and forth with us to get me in here, and Scott, Chairman Harris, and others who are here. Thank you guys so much and gals for what you're doing. God bless you all. Thank you.